Just a few years later was this fellow, Sir Thomas Urquhart of Cromarty. This is from his own work. He thinks quite highly of himself. You can see the unicorn, the muses putting laurels on his head, and it's quite, well, and his fancy dress too. I don't think you would want to be in the same room as this guy, probably standing up again on a table or chair shouting whatever he thought was appropriate. It's said that he died in a fit of laughter when hearing the news of the restoration of Charles II when he was in exile in Holland, he being a royalist soldier who just couldn't believe it. So anyway, Cromarty similarly believed that education had a power to improve the state of man. Urquhart's Episcopalian convictions in relation to his notions of improvement demonstrate that this mentality was not solely motivated by Presbyterian reforms, but was a more general Protestant belief that education could facilitate prosperity. Urquhart was known for his eccentric personality, his superfluous language, and his complex mathematical theorems. It is likely he was educated in Cromarty before attending King's College in Aberdeen, alongside Simon Fraser, Master of Lovat. As an author, translator, traveller, royalist soldier, and courtier, he was fully enmeshed in the civil and polite society. The Urquhart family was very well connected in the north, using Cromarty as his base, and they had held significant sway across the Murray Firth and Banff. Urquhart's Logopendectesian, or an introduction to the universal language. So he was trying to create a universal language that all of Europe could speak. They already kind of had one with Latin, but he wanted to create a new one. So he published this in 1653, and it discussed a strategy for improving boroughs, in his case Cromarty, to ensure prosperity and growth. Pivotal to his strategy was the foundation of a university. Urquhart encouraged a broad education emulating the Gentleman's Handbook. He wrote, "By virtue whereof the professors of all sciences, liberal disciplines, arts factive and active, mechanic trades, and whatever concerns either virtue or learning, practical or theoretic, had been cherished for fixing their abode in it." Cromarty. The creation of such an institution would have dramatically improved the educational infrastructure in the north of Scotland, but Urquhart's plans were never realised. Not to the formulation of UHI. That's David's. I get that from him. In the north of Scotland until the mid-18th century, however, few intellectuals engaged in the same way with pedagogy until the Enlightenment. The Scottish Enlightenment witnessed the growth of the professional class, with the bureaucratization of the government and the need for professionally trained men in British, Scottish society, as well as in the Empire. However, the urban elite and the clergy retained their position within society. Embroiled in the societal development is the debate of the existence of the democratic scholar, or the latter parts. Despite their contested existence, or more specifically, the proliferation, there was an expansion of the middling sort who took advantage of the educational opportunities and succeeded in upward social mobility. The enlightened ideas of virtue, logic, rationalism, discipline, and culture informed the education pursued by these young gentlemen, indeed gentlewomen. David Fordyce, 1711 to 1751, was a native of Aberdeen, born into one of these middling families. He became a professor of moral philosophy at Marischal College, and unfortunately died before he was able to produce much writing. His ship foundered off the coast of the Netherlands when he was traveling back home. His popular text, A Dialogue Concerning Education, published in 1745, was extremely popular and was reprinted no fewer than 5 times in 25 years after its first appearance. It has also been called a precursor to Rousseau's Emile, which is a very important gentleman's handbook. It embodied the Enlightenment ideas and highlighted the ideological change in terms of education's role in societal development. Fordyce demonstrated the positive characteristics of enlightened society and the importance of education in the development of young men. Simplicus, the protagonist in Fordyce's dialogue, learnt what it meant to be a refined gentleman at his fictitious academy, where, There was no branch of literature from which we are secluded, no materials which we do not work and polish for our own benefit and that of others. At the academy, overseen by the master, Simplicus observes, I was very agreeably surprised with the sight of so many young gentlemen, some of them of rank and fortune, who have come hither from all quarters to imbibe in the principles of science and virtue, in order to qualify them for their service to their country and to their friends. To see them, the pupils, you would imagine you are transported into the old academy or the portions at Athens, where the philosophers taught or talked philosophy with the most familiar and unassuming manner. This passage illuminates the presence of the democratic scholar as the majority rather than those of rank and fortune. Fordyce added a patriotic tone by stating that education was the gentleman's duty to the well-being of the country, not just to the benefit of the king, as it had been stressed in the 17th century. Moreover, this passage indicates a return migration of young gentlemen coming home for their education and training. Examples of this return migration are present in the North and late 18th century, where children were sent home from the West Indies, as well as with mortifications and subscriptions for schools and academies, as well as universities, or a combination of all of those together. This occurred within the 17th century as well, but the source of the students and the funds were from the wider North Sea and Baltic region, demonstrating a change in the focus of Scottish migration between the two centuries. Following Fordyce, another Aberdeenshire native who was very important in the social scene of Scotland at the time, Sir William Forbes of Fettercairn in Pitsligo, was a product of this mid-18th century education system. Educated in Aberdeen, he went on to be a successful Edinburgh banker and philanthropist. Forbes, having grown up fatherless, ensured that his children would not lack paternal guidance. Forbes drafted Letters to My Children, which remains in a manuscript copy at the National Library that I've been able to have access to. And it offered advice on multiple topics. The letters are critical to understanding the intimate thoughts of this father and his place as a northern professional and laird. Forbes' letters are strikingly similar to Gordon's advice to his nephew, but 150 years later. Both of these men were influenced by and clearly used widely known educational texts to inform their decisions of what constituted a proper education. It is reasonable that many others would have felt the same and read these texts, but they were not struck with the same motivation to compile their thoughts in such a comprehensive way. Forbes believed it was his son's duty to take advantage of their position and to be well educated as, quote, the bulk of mankind is said, are made for action, not speculation. They do not have the time to spare for the acquisition of literary knowledge. This is no exception to others who are blessed with all the opportunities of a liberal and polished education. Forbes encouraged his sons to excel at school and surpass all of their classmates, fostering the requisite skills for politics and business. And Forbes clearly shared Fordyce's belief that education can improve. Forbes applied this philosophy and sat on the board of governors of multiple philanthropic organizations in Edinburgh, as well as the Musical Society. In the Renaissance in the 17th century, Ethelstone, Marshall, Philorth, and Gordon, and Urquhart had believed that educational institutions were vital for stimulating growth, prosperity, and civility, while also retaining intellectuals in the North. These examples of development of educational institutions prior to the Enlightenment demonstrates an impressive degree of personal and intellectual investment which the northern nobility had in education, and points to their development within wider pedagogical trends. The Scottish Enlightenment reinvigorated intellectual life towards education and its purpose in society. For the elite, it remained relatively similar: to learn the required skills to administer your estates and engage with politics. However, their beliefs in the place of education in society changed markedly. In the 17th century, the elite were far more concerned with civilizing the people. During the 18th century, after the final Jacobite incursion, the barbarous people had been transformed. Education was no longer seen to civilize, but to inform and build an enlightened, polite, well-educated, sensible, and moral society. The aggressive policies of the 17th century were no longer acceptable or required. Okay,